And Eaton here again. What I've got for you here is a reading called The Corporate Governance of Listed Companies, a manual for investors. And if that doesn't get you excited, I don't know what will. Anyway, this reading, corporate governance, has become a real buzzword and a lot more attention focused on it, so we need to define that and talk a little bit about it. One of the frustrating things about this reading is it has an awful lot of lists of things you should consider, things you should consider, things you should consider, and I don't think you have to memorize all of that, but what I want to do is I think give you some clear things that kind of tie it all together and that we can focus on. That is the overriding principles. So let's jump into this. We've only got, 12, 13 slides, something like that, so it won't take too long. We'll try and make it not too painful. But let's jump onto this first slide and see if we can define corporate governance. Refers to the firm's internal controls. Get my pen going here. Internal controls. Make my pen fatter. So controls on the firm resources. I mean, here's what we're going to get to, is you've got the shareholders that own the company, right? And then you got the board of directors that kind of runs the overall show, and they put in top management, CEO, CFO, whatever the president, whatever the structure is, to run the company. Well, we want to find out, are they running it in the interest of shareholders, which is what they're supposed to do. They're all paid by the shareholders who are the owners of the company. So corporate governance defines the rights and responsibilities of management, the board, and shareholders. Now, the responsibilities of shareholders, not too much. Rights of shareholders, very important here. So our overriding principle here is that good corporate governance ensures that shareholder interests are protected. That is, management, employees are not using firm money, firm assets, firm resources for things that benefit them or others at the expense of shareholders. So that's kind of the bottom line here. So what are some of the factors affecting corporate governance? Well, the board of directors. We will find that the idea of independent directors, very important. We'll talk about that in some more detail in a minute. Qualifications of the directors. What are the terms? Well, annual terms. Annual terms are thought to be better for shareholders. It just makes these guys easier, these ladies easier to replace. Okay? One of the alternatives is staggered terms, where these board members are on this 4-year cycle, and then you elect 2, and they serve for 4 years, and then 2 that serve for 4 years. So that's staggered. Well, it makes it harder to reconstitute the board at any point in time. And the other thing we want to look at is the committee structures, and we'll look at specific committees here in just a moment as well. As far as management, is there a management code of ethics? That's a good thing. Is there board oversight over management? That's a good thing. Okay. What about management compensation? How is it structured? Are the interests of management aligned with the interests of shareholders? And our third bullet point here is shareholder rights. What rights do the shareholders have? What are the voting rights? Are they cumulative? Okay. Now, when we're talking about cumulative here, it's not like we're talking about cumulative preferred and talking about dividends. We're talking about how the voting is structured. If there's 5 board seats, statutory voting says you're going to have 5 separate elections. So if I own 51% of the stock, I can win every election. I can elect 5 people that I like to the board of directors. And those other 49% of the shareholders, tough luck. Now with cumulative voting, you have one election with many candidates, and the top 5 vote getters will constitute the board, will be elected to the board. Now, boards are often bigger than 5. I'm just using that for an example. But what that does, and I'm not going to get into the math here, but what it does is says, well, if I have 100 shares, then I get 500 votes. And if I put all those votes for one person, I'm going to have more say in that election. And it turns out that if I own 40% of the stock and everybody else owns 60, I can still elect 40% of the 5 board members. I can take my cumulative votes and split them between 2 candidates, and those 2 will have to be in the top 5. So that's why cumulative voting is important. It can give minority shareholders representation on the board that they wouldn't necessarily get. What about proxy voting? Well, I've never run into a company that didn't have proxy voting, but I guess that would be a real negative if it didn't. Proxy voting just says I can vote on those issues requiring a shareholder vote without going to the annual meeting in New York or Chicago or Fairbanks or wherever they decide to have it. And what sorts of actions require shareholder approval? That is, how much can the board get away with without submitting it to a vote of all the shareholders? So let's talk about the board. What makes a good board? Well, independence. That is our main theme here for board members. Although we also find out such interesting things as it helps if the board member has experience in the industry. It helps if the board member has board and management experience, things like that. So sometimes it's hard to make questions about this corporate governance. You say, well, gee, what kind of board member would you like? Would you like one with no ethics who's spent a lot of his life in jail, or one that's a pillar of the community and known for his upfront, transparent, and ethical behavior? I mean, it's a no-brainer. So that's why we have to fall back to these central themes in order to keep things kind of in order here. Also, it is advantageous for the board to meet without the managers present. Remember, these managers may have a different set of incentives than shareholders do, and we don't want management to be shoving the board around. It really should be the other way around, with the board acting independently in the interests of shareholders. And we'll talk about what it means more to be an independent board member. The board should have the ability to hire outside consultants with specialized knowledge. So board members can't know everything. If they need to know more about their derivatives and their risk management and their risk exposures, rather than take the word of the CFO or the opinion of the CFO, they may want to go out and get some independent appraisal of the situation by outside experts. And so that's why this is a plus. On legal issues as well, they can go outside for external opinions. Annual terms, I mentioned, give the shareholders more control than they would with longer terms or longer staggered terms. What are some of the negative factors? Well, this may surprise you, but it's considered a negative if the current chief executive officer or a past CEO is the chairman of the board. They're two tightly related. So this idea of an independent board is independent of management, independent of other relationships with the company, so that their sole focus is on shareholder interests. Well, let's get ahead to the next slide here and talk about what it means to be an independent board member. Number one, board members who do not have a material relationship with management or significant shareholders. That is, they're not being paid by management with a consulting contract. That way they're beholden to management and they're not truly independent in their board service. There should be no compensation from the firm other than for their board service. So if a board member goes out and says, gee, I found a great acquisition for you out in Maryland. It really fits well with your business. The guy's looking to sell. No finder's fees for them. No consulting fees. Just their board service compensation, which is usually quite adequate for the work involved. And independent board members work to protect shareholders' long-term interests. So what makes a good board member? Well, let's see. Can they make informed decisions? I guess let's put a plus there, huh? You want to put a plus there? Can they make informed? Yeah, that would be a plus if they could make informed. Do they understand the business? That's why I say it's so hard to write multiple choice questions, you know. Gee, You know, a board member should understand the business, not understand the business. It doesn't really matter if he understands the business. It's just common sense. So yeah, they need to understand the business. We'd like to have ethical rather than unethical board members. Okay, if they've had a lot of legal, regulatory problems in the past, been barred from participating in the securities industry, that's probably a negative there. Okay, if they've had legal or regulatory problems. Okay, understanding the business is a plus. Yes, we think ethical is a plus, especially in the context of this reading here. Have they had other board experience? Yeah, that's a plus. Okay, do they attend meetings? Maybe we should vote on this one. Let's call it a plus, okay, if they attend the meetings. Now we've got some definitional stuff here for you. Some of the board committees, some of the common ones are an audit committee. Ensures the quality of the financial reporting and that proper procedures have been followed, whether that's US GAAP or IFRS or whatever the reporting requirements of. And we say they control the auditors. Well, they select the auditor, which is often put up to a shareholder vote on the choice of the independent auditor for the financial statements, but they initially select and recommend excuse me, the auditors and monitor that function. There's a compensation committee that works on setting executive compensation, compensation packages, incentive packages that link compensation to long-term performance. The compensation committee really needs to be independent from management because they're talking about negotiating with management about their pay and total employment packages. The nominations committee is responsible for finding nominees for board seats and recruiting new members for the board that complement the existing board, bring talent or expertise or knowledge of a related industry that they think can really help the overall board in terms of what kind of job it's doing for shareholders. Well, what about a code of ethics? Well, not surprisingly, this reading says a strong code of ethics is needed. And I guess I should tell you that in introducing this reading, there are several studies that say according to certain measures of corporate governance, firms with good corporate governance have higher returns. Well, how else are you going to convince a finance guy that something's important except to tell him he can make money with it? So we'll see what the eventual outcome of that literature is as it gets a little more developed and we find out more. But there's no shortage of people doing research on that and finding that companies with stronger codes of ethics and better corporate governance are actually doing a better job for their shareholders. So that could be true. Policies should prevent personal use of corporate assets. Okay? If there's a business jet, okay, you can't just use it to go see your mom in Nantucket on weekends. Board members should not serve as consultants to the company. I mentioned that already. Board members should not receive finder's fees for merger and acquisition or selling off a unit or anything like that. So those are some of the highlights of the Code of Ethics. They should be congruent with local laws, prohibit advantages to firm insiders. And what are the conditions for waiving some of these and how frequently can they be used? Code of Ethics should require timely information be given to the board of directors, and there should be periodic audits and reviews of the Code of Ethics. So, in general, a weak code allows related party transactions and personal use of company assets. Okay? I mean, you work for a company, it'd be nice, your neighbor's kid wants to get his CFA charter, he says, hey, can you hook me up, you know? Can you get me free materials or get me into this seminar or something like that? Well, in general, the answer is no, I can't. It's not mine to give away. Okay? It's the property of the Washington Post, our parent company. And if they wanted me to be able to give it away, they probably would have mentioned it. Okay, proxy voting rules. Easy proxy voting is a good thing. It gives you better shareholders' rights. So what are some of the negatives? Well, if there's any limits on your proxy voting on items that require a shareholder vote, if the meetings are timed inconveniently, or perhaps are in Prudhoe Bay, Alaska, or something like that, where they're not only timed but located inconveniently to keep shareholders from showing up, that's not a good thing. Requiring attendance rather than, this doesn't mean everybody has to come, requiring attendance in order to vote is a negative. Okay, allows share blocking. Now I haven't run into this too much, but what share blocking is, says, well, if you didn't own the shares for 4 months prior to the meeting, excuse me, if you didn't own the shares for 4 months prior to the meeting, you don't get to vote. So only long-term holders get to vote. That would be a negative. Okay. And this cumulative voting, if there's a large minority shareholder group like a founding family, just be aware of the implications of that. Now, in fact, as I mentioned, I think cumulative voting is a good thing for minority representation. But if there's a large minority group that's very cohesive, that is, speaks with one voice, and a lot of other disparate shareholders, cumulative voting may give them a little bit more control than you want them to have. So that's just something to look at. I wouldn't say necessarily a clear-cut positive or negative in this, but if you have to vote, vote for cumulative voting to be a good thing for shareholders' interests and better corporate governance. So what about shareholder-sponsored actions? Can shareholders come up with things to be voted on? What kind of requests that they can make? So the more ability shareholders have to influence the board, the greater the shareholder protection. Of course, board members can't be, giving out their cell phone numbers to all the owners of the common stock of the corporation. Probably wouldn't work out too well. But in terms of board nominations, can shareholders make a nomination to the board? Can they present resolutions and proposals either to the board or for shareholder approval or shareholder decision? Some of the issues here are when these proposals and resolutions can be made, how can you remove the board, can they be removed, and does it require just a majority or a supermajority to make adjustments to the board? Simple majority being 50% plus, supermajority being something larger than that, 60, 65, 70% required to make a change. That's an impediment to governance by the shareholders. Now, sometimes you'll have different classes of stock, and they can have different voting rights. They can also have different dividends on them, different voting rights, different values per share, all sorts of things like that. But we separate voting rights and economic value in the case that we're most concerned about here. So if all the shares are the same in terms of their claim against the company, but some have 10 votes and some have 1 vote, and you often see this if there's a founding family that over time has grown a company and issued a lot of stock to where once they had 60% of the stock, now they've only got 25% of the stock because they had to raise a lot more money and sell more stock to grow the firm. Well, in that case, they may structure it so they have like super voting stock. So even though they only own on an economic basis 20 or 25% of the company, they may have 60% of the votes. And this is not a good thing for shareholders' rights and corporate governance. Potential acquirers may just deal with the super voting shareholders and ignore the rest. And in general, when you separate voting rights from economic claims, it works to the impairment of at least one set of shareholders. I mean, it may be fine for this group over here, but detrimental to this other group over here. And different classes of stock may lead to trouble later on in issuing new shares and raising equity capital because people are less inclined to buy those shares in which the voting right is small relative to the proportional economic ownership. What about takeover defenses and share values? Well, overall, in a well-functioning capitalist system, if the management of a firm is doing a very poor job, the stock price falls, the value of the business falls. An outsider may look at that and say, you know, there's a lot of value there. We should buy that firm for what it's selling for right now, put in better management, put in better incentives, put in better corporate governance, and build this back up and then sell it. Okay? There's a lot of money to be made there in these takeovers. And that's really one way that poor management, say you've got a board of directors that's dominated by management, they're running it in their own interests, and the earnings and the share price start to reflect that over time. Well, the way to boot them out is to take over the company or buy up enough shares to where you control the board. But companies have takeover defenses, and you can generally think of these takeover defenses as a way for management to protect their jobs. This is not in the shareholders' interests. There's many, many instances where companies have had a takeover offer for $80. They've convinced their shareholders, no way, no way, we're going to be worth $150 in 2 years. This is way too cheap, and this and that and the other thing. And then once they get rid of the takeover offer, the stock falls from 80 to 47 and never sees 80 again the rest of its life. Okay, so takeover defenses are not good for shareholder value. Some of the takeover defenses that reduce shareholder value are golden parachutes. It says if this firm gets taken over and you get kicked out as CEO, we are going to pay you hundreds of millions of dollars. Poison pill. A poison pill says if somebody, if an acquirer acquires this much of the company, then the other shareholders get some sort of new securities or some sort of benefit. Think of a poison pill as the firm's going to get gobbled up by a wolf, an intelligent wolf. So the wolf is intelligent enough to know that if the company takes a poison pill and he eats the company, he'll die too. So that's the idea. And then green mail is an especially fun thing because there an external buyer takes over and accumulates 10-15% of a firm's stock and tells the management, yeah, I'm going to buy you out and you're going to lose your jobs and I'm taking over this company. And he says, but you know what? If you'll buy these shares back from me at a premium to the market price and a premium to what I paid for them, I promise to go away and not try any takeovers for the next 2 years. That's green mail. All of these are operate against shareholder interests. So other things you might look at is shareholder approval required to implement golden parachutes and poison pills and green mail. And in the case of an acquisition, is government intervention likely? Okay, we're just going to finish here with a corporate governance problem. It says, which of the following characteristics of a board is least supportive of share owner protection? Now remember, whenever you get a question that has least or false, least likely, least appropriate, why don't you underline that while you're taking the question to remind yourself that you're looking for the false, wrong, least likely answer. In this case, our three choices are firm suppliers, customers, and consultants are not represented on the board. Is that a good thing or is that a bad thing? Well, that's a good thing. Let's put a plus by that. That's a good thing because, see, firm suppliers, they have their own agenda. They'd like you to keep buying from them, especially at high uneconomic prices. The customers, oh, they want better terms and lower prices and you to do everything for them, even if it's bad for shareholders. And consultants, they just want to keep earning their hourly money. So the fact that these are not on the board is a plus because they're going to act in their own interests, which may run counter to shareholder interests. The board chairman is the ex-CEO of the firm. Well, we already said that's a negative. He's got too close a ties to the firm and current management and other employees. The new CEO may be his specifically named successor. And C, the board often meets without management present. That is a big plus and almost a requirement for good corporate governance. So let's see how we did. Yep, it is B. That's the one that's not good for shareholders. A and C are, and B is not. Hope that overview helps. Good luck in your corporate governance.